tell us what really went wrong, why the High Court threw out law on interest rates. Were you shocked? Good morning, Jakoro.
No, I'm not shocked because the banks have been for a long time uncomfortable. I am aware that COFEC is going to court to appeal the suspect ruling. And I think that the banks must be stopped. Somehow, I am happy that we are having sitting members of parliament, both in the Senate and National Assembly on this panel, and that they may tell their colleagues that what the banks are trying to do is basically to commit a crime on Kenyans. And that the judiciary, like I have always said here, must be that which is of some conscience. The banks just declared, Dibal, last month that they made collectively 152 billion shillings profit. How much more do they want from Kenyans? And as it were, Kenyans are not enjoying banking services because the government is trading with the banks. I think it is an opportunity, if my colleagues care to take the message back to Parliament, to close the overnight trading window where the banks are giving money overnight for a profit of 19%. That is why the banks are uncomfortable with the 14% to give to the public. Why give the public at a cap of 13% as it were today, while you can get 19% overnight? So I am not surprised. I know what they are trying to do, but how do I have this feeling they will fail?
Thank you.
They don't. We can't let them get away with it.
So was it with your with the wording that the actually courts have found that is a bit faulty, because they say here Parliament's failure to define key technical words used in the interest rates control law made the legislation ambiguous?
Would that be up to the courts really to determine? That's why I say the ruling is suspect. We have been, Parliament gives the guidelines in law. The implementation is for the government.
Okay.
That law is very clear, and I don't think there's anything unconstitutional about consumer protection. I think the banks must work with the government and Kenyans to make this place livable. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Let's hear from Eseli, right? And I'll request Aaron Chirodi, you can just scoot over a bit so that we can get a space as Eseli is continuing with the bank interest rates.
The courts,
just scoot over a bit.
The ruling by the courts, when you look at it, as Jakoyo says, is suspect. Because if they say that in the Act, we did not define the CBR rate, yet actually that CBR rate is defined in the Central Bank Act. It's already defined in the Central Bank Act. Then they are saying we should have done it the same way as it is in the Central Bank Act. You know, they are just, fishing for some reason. And Dibal, you should know that the banks in this country are so powerful. They are so powerful. They can get away with anything. In fact, I don't know why we are still calling them banks. We should call them official Shylocks, because that's what banks have become, official Shylocks. In fact, they have reached a point where, apart from this fight about the interest rates, banks are now even underpaying their own employees to increase their profits. Actually, they have gone rogue.
Yeah.
They have gone completely rogue. And if the courts are going to protect the banks, then Kenyans should know that they have been thrown into the deep end, and it's without a life suit, and it's going to be terrible, because they argue that they are not lending to common mwananchi because of the interest rate cap, which is not entirely true. They are not lending to the common mwananchi because the government is busy borrowing from the banks. So the common mwananchi is competing with the government to borrow from the banks. That's what the truth of the matter, the way it is. And the way they are going about it, if they go on that way, I think you've read also a lot of reports of massive thefts from banks electronically and so on. I think they're going to undergo that because they themselves are mishandling their own employees. Then they are now mishandling their customers. So really, it's just that Kenyans have got no other choice but to bank with them. Otherwise, really, they are not banks anymore. They are Shylocks.
The Shylocks. Yeah. And you can see also what was on the front page of the Business Daily. This was last Tuesday, on the 5th of March. This is the billions they've made so far. The interest caps, notwithstanding, right now, 152.3 billion shillings record profit in 2018. Super normal profit. I don't know what you think, Dr.
Those obscene profits are unjustified in a country of our size.
I must warn myself that being an advocate, it may not be absolutely prudent to comment on a decision that I've not read. I see it's quoted that they gave a reasoned and detailed decision. And so I will reserve my detailed comments to when I have read. But what I can say is that I would not use the words that my colleagues have used, but I would just say that the decision of the court appears to be interesting. It is interesting first because it appears from the report pegged on the matter that the act is unclear, that there are certain terms that are not clearly defined. It is ambiguous. Now, ambiguity ordinarily would not be a reason to declare any law as unconstitutional, because under Article 165 of the Constitution, you will declare a law as inconsistent or in contradiction with the Constitution, which means you must show which part of the Constitution is contradicted or which part of the Constitution it's inconsistent with, not because it is ambiguous. Secondly, ambiguity. Ordinarily, if a law is ambiguous, then the court adopts what we call the best interpretation. That is the interpretation that best serves the intention of the legislature. And so if they found that it was capable of multiple interpretations, then the question would be, what was the intention of the legislature? I think the intention of the legislature has always been clear. It was clear when it was enacted, and even recently, this matter was brought to the House because there's been a very strong move to remove this law. But I can tell you that the members of parliament have remained very consistent and clear. So the intention cannot be doubted. And thirdly, I'm not quite sure, but I will strive to understand why, having found so, they would then give the legislature 1 year to amend, or make those corrections. Because the work of the High Court is to wait for the legislature to make a law and then determine whether it is constitutional or not, whether it's inconsistent or not. Once they pronounce themselves, it is up to the legislature to pronounce itself whether it does that within 1 week, within 1 year, within 10 years, or not at all. So I think it's a bit, it is circumlocutus, but I will wait and read the detailed judgment.
It is circumlocutus. That word.
What is that in Kijaluo?
I'll show you it's a new one.
Let's hear from Boni Khalwale. Yeah, looking at that headline in the Business Daily today.
I'm afraid I have to agree with the courts.
You have to agree with the courts?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
The courts in that pronouncement, at least from what we are being told, have not said that they are against capping of interest rates. What the courts have done is to merely indict Parliament, and it should worry members of Parliament that their quality of legislation is being challenged. Maybe unknown to some members of the public, there is a robust legal affairs department in Parliament, packed with very high quality lawyers, with all the facilities that they would need to support Parliament. Where were they at all the stages of lawmaking, which is known to all of us on this bench, when they should have advised that these issues that have been pointed out by the judges should have been addressed? Look at the 3 points the judges are raising. They are saying there was failure to define technical words. I think my brother Otiende should be the one on the front line in supporting them, showing how dangerous it would be for you to have a law that is not clear, even on a basic issue as the definition of a word. In fact, when a bill is being drafted, on the memorandum of objects of that particular bill, there's usually an attempt to define as many of these words as possible. Why didn't they do it? The second thing that is raised by these courts to confirm that they were doing it in good intention is that they have even gone ahead and said, we are giving Parliament a period of around 1 year so as to amend this law, or rather so as to clean up the concerns that were raised by the judges. That is good faith. The third point, which makes me support the lawyers, is they are telling us that failure to amend this ambiguous, failure to remove this ambiguity would actually give an opportunity of the banks reverting to the old system where they were arbitrarily setting interest rates. So the ruling is in good faith. They're just simply saying members of Parliament did not do a quality piece of legislation. I support the judges.
You support the judges?
Yes.
All right. Aaron Chirot, we've heard from you on this particular legislation.
Nope. I think I do not agree with my good friend Senator Boni Halwale on this one, because reading the crux of a matter, and unfortunately, I too, like Honorable Otiende, haven't had the opportunity to read the full ruling, so I completely rely on what is being reported here. And the backbone of the argument is that there was ambiguity in law. Then if to the banks, because it's them who filed this case, if the biggest problem they had was with the ambiguousness of the law, then either they would have sought for interpretation or simply seek their prayers in court then would have been that Parliament be compelled to clean up the act. Unfortunately, they went straight for it and determined that what needs to be done is you strike out the whole amendment. This, the whole actually piece of legislation, which is rather unfortunate because Kenyans have been benefiting immensely, at least the few that were able to borrow. We have seen the profits that are being reported. There's a huge push by the banks to want to take us to the days when we used to pay 24 to 25% annually for a loan of whatever amount, which was really struggling the SME sector. Banks have intentionally gone out of their way to ensure that they frustrate this law. They have refused to borrow, to lend money to many of our SMEs, and therefore many of these businesses have gone down. And of course it is on account that they're claiming, the risk of these customers cannot be commensurate to the earnings that you're being given. But you have seen the profits that are being reported. I will be more okay, Dibal, if many of these banks were locally owned. But this is 150 billion, which probably maybe only 20 billion is remaining in Kenya. The rest is capital flight, money that is getting out of this economy to go to different economies. Therefore, I think Parliament, and I want to urge my colleagues, because this is properly under the purview of a National Assembly, Eseli and Otiende, to quickly find ways and mechanisms through which this can be cleaned up. Because it's not only with just these loans, even with the new technology way of borrowing, like in the mobile loans, Kenyans are being fleeced. They are paying almost 400% per annum.
Thank you.
Interest on those loans. So I think there's need for legislation.
So Jakoyo did a sloppy job in actually drafting this particular legislation,
Not true.
so to speak.
Not true.
If there is a lot of ambiguity that is coming here, what the court is really saying, and what Boni is raising, that the manner of legislation that is coming from Parliament is really wanting.
Which is why everybody, or Dr. Eseli agrees with him, says the ruling is suspect. Dibal, what is ambiguous about credit facility?
Yes.
The phrase credit facility. Well, I mean, these are trained lawyers, these judges. We are not picking our judges from the streets.
Yes.
How would it be ambiguous on the term? What would be ambiguous on the term CBR rate? Remember, before we enacted this law, there was always CBR rate. Except the banks misused it. So we said, the only thing we added, the only thing Parliament added is that they cannot charge more than 4% term above the CBR rate. So in their ambiguous words, the only thing Parliament did was to add the word 4% term. And I was the drafter. And we have gone through this, and Boni was, I agree with his reasoning, but he was always on the side of the consumer.
Yes.
Article 46 of our Constitution, 46C, gives the public
To the protection of
to
their
the
health.
consumer, protection of consumer, to the protection of their health, safety, and economic interests. Does not give it to the banks, gives it to the consumers. Dibal, as you are aware, I was the drafter. The guy, it says Parliament shall enact a law. I drafted the Consumer Protection Act, and Parliament agreed with me, and the President agreed with me. It does not give the banks the power they are trying to use to fleece Kenyans. I think, might I repeat, that we need to take this opportunity, Honorable Seli, to seal this overnight trading window. We need banks to facilitate our economy. One of the primary duties of the state is to help us create wealth. How do we create wealth if there is serious capital flight, which Honorable Senator Cheriot has said? Most of this money is going to foreign banks. These banks, if you go to their world capitals where they are domiciled, they don't make any money.
Thank you.
Why are they making billions from Kenya?
All right, thank you.
Are
we?
Dibal, something, please.
Yes, please.
I think, my colleagues, you are not being fair. In this ruling, the judges were not speaking to ownership of banks. Hearing you speak, you are saying that this profit they are making is going to foreigners and all that. What the judges are doing, and we all know as legislators that judges do it all the time in their rulings. After they have made a ruling on a particular matter, if there is something they found in a law that could be improved on, they always make this kind of recommendation. So why are we refusing to agree with the nurses that let us go back to Parliament and address the issues that have been raised? Dr. Seli, for example, let's go to our profession. We all know that abortion is not allowed under the Constitution. And if it is left to be ambiguous, it would make it illegal for a qualified doctor who finds that there is need to allow abortion to go on to save the life of the mother. So, because that distinction has to be made, you start by the first statement that it is not allowed, but then qualify it later on. That yes, in situations whereby it is a life-saving requirement, let a qualified person do it. I believe, and I'm not a financial expert, my brother Jacoyo, this is all that the judges are saying, that let's go ahead and cap interest rates, but as we do it, we be clear.
All right.
Well,
For example, yes?
can I speak to
Yeah,
what
yes, yes.
Dr. Halwale is talking about?
Yeah.
And let me say first, generally, Honorable Senator Dr. Halwale has lately adopted this habit of vilifying Parliament generally about what it has done and what it has failed to do. I think because he's no longer in Parliament. This is not the first time. I think that is not fair. I think when we are speaking to issues, and some of these issues, they may have been enacted later, but you will find their genesis was in Parliament even when you are there. So they are not entirely new. And so secondly, when you assume this moral high ground of talking about members of parliament doing or not doing what they ought to do, you must remember that you are in that parliament for 15 years. So any failure or commissions or omissions would apply to you in equal measure. But I think the important thing is, and I will for now avoid your exemplification, in terms of the Article 26 on the right to life, because you might not be entirely correct either. But just coming to this issue, what I understand my colleagues to be saying is speaking to the reason why that law was enacted. The reason is to prevent immoral levels of profit at the expense of Kenyans. Yeah. And what they are saying is that the effect of the decision of the High Court is to suspend that attempt to control it and therefore to revert to what we needed to avoid in the first place. So in my mind, that is completely intertwined. But secondly, what I thought you'd be saying, when you sit here and say that members of parliament are lazy, the Legal Affairs Committee did not do its work, you should be telling us what is it in that law that is ambiguous. Because we started by saying that we've not read it. But there are only two things that stand out so far. One, from the reports, is that the judges, as they noted that the word at no more than 4% of the central bank rate is vague, since it is not clear if it is above or below the CBR rate. At no more than 4%, how can that be unclear? Maybe you should be explaining to us what we don't know, at how that is unclear. When then it says that the judges think that the lack of definition of the meaning of credit facility is left open. So instead of vilifying, because we've said we've not read it, maybe you should be explaining to us what is it. Because so far, from what I can see in the media, it's a bit difficult to understand. And that is why we went to the circumlocution issue. So I think it is important to put things in their perspective.
Exactly. Finally on it.
But I think the judges were also fair because they suspended their judgment for a year to allow Parliament to do those amendments.
In good faith.
And we are going to do those amendments.
Exactly.
We are going to do them. Because even if they are trying to make us, nitpick and, define things that are already known, we'll do it. If that's what will save the Kenyans from the misbehavior of the banks, we will. Because it's important that we do so, because when you look at the profits that the banks are making, and the complaints that the banks are raising against this interest rate capping, it doesn't make sense. The reason, and I keep on insisting, the interest rates cap is not the reason why the banks are not lending to the Mwananchi. The banks are not lending the Mwananchi because the government itself is borrowing from the banks. And the banks prefer the government because it's a more secure borrower. That's why. So if the government stopped borrowing so much from the banks will have so much money they'll be able to lend to Wananchi. If you remember, soon after the NARC government took over and the borrowing by the government went down, the banks were hawking money on the streets. They were virtually hawking money, asking you to take a loan because they had so much money.
Yes.
They didn't know where to take it because the government was not borrowing. But right now the government is borrowing too much, and that's why you find that the banks prefer lending to the government, and then they are using the interest rates cap as an excuse for not lending to the Mwananchi.
Okay. I'll be remiss if we continue with our discussion and we don't really talk about what is happening in the country right now, the looming hunger. And of course, we know yesterday also the Deputy President gave an assurance that we have enough food in the country. This is not a cause of worry, and we've not actually crossed to the emergency zone as it is with the drought and famine. I just want to pick your brains on that a bit in light of this cyclical, knee-jerk reactions we've been having from government since 2012. We've never had a very robust sort of, futuristic way of dealing with drought and farming in this country. And this epoch of time, as we always say, no one should be dying in our country because of hunger. Aaron Cheruiyot.
It's really unfortunate in this day and age. No self-respecting government should allow this to happen. That I have listened very cleanly, and Dibal, it's unfortunate though that sometimes to get proper news and to get the truth on, there's no a time it has ever been difficult to find the truth as it is right now in Kenya, because Kenyans have this habit on social media, because I saw a clarification. I have seen how this story began with images being shared, and I was really disturbed, only for a clarification to be given later. The beauty of this is that Kenyans have a way of self-checking by other Kenyans who clarified and say the photos that were being circulated were not actually originally from Kenya, but from Ethiopia. Mainstream media, of course, you know where I stand with that issue on where they are with the truth nowadays. Therefore, it's extremely difficult in this day and age. But I have had opportunity to call and talk to leaders from some of these worst hit counties like Baringo, Turkana, and they do agree that the situation is dire. But none of them can confirm that for sure people have died, as was being reported in sections of the media. But they for sure agree that the situation is dire and there is need for government to act. But you must never forget something. Maybe the reason why certain office holders, the people who would ordinarily ensure that the logistical part of ensuring that the food reaches those that have been affected in good time, do not get there on time, but it becomes a matter of emergency, is that there is additional profit to be made when these things are done as a case of emergency, as opposed to doing it at the right time. Because does it really make sense for government to now come out and say we have enough food in our stores? What is the food doing in the stores? That food should already have been in the distribution centers, or the places that the proximity of the places where Kenyans are being affected. Therefore, it's really unfortunate. And in other speak, they say that a country that cannot feed itself is not worth speaking before its peers. And it's really unfortunate if Kenya has sunk to those levels where sections of our citizens are dying of hunger. I hope, and I listened to the communication that came from the Deputy President and the ministers who were with him yesterday, giving assurance to the country that no Kenyan will die of hunger, that the food will be moved as soon as possible. Then I'll keep an observant eye, hoping that in the next few days that will be the truth and we will not be receiving the images we've been seeing. Lastly, the most unfortunate thing, Dibal, is that despite all efforts, devolution, equalization fund, and many other things, all these mitigation efforts that have been done to try and salvage the situation in these parts of the country, there's so little to write home about in terms of intervention and trying to ensure that this thing doesn't continue to happen. This is 2019, for your information. Kenya is stable. We are building, I don't know, world-class railways and highways, but we still have sections of our country that we can't feed. It's just inhuman, to say the least, and a serious indictment on us who are in leadership.
It's inhuman, but is it also a misplaced priority that we have all these shining, stars projects that we do have, yet we cannot feed ordinary wananchi? Isali, briefly.
It's not for lack of food. It's for lack of planning, because it's a question of when the weather starts changing the way it's been changing, we should already know which are the vulnerable areas and start preparing and placing the food supplies in those areas. We don't have to wait for this crisis so that we come up with a budget of 2 billion to distribute this food. I can assure you, even that 2 billion, it's only 500 million that will be used in this process. The rest will go into people's pockets. So I think we are a system that knows that a crisis will come, and we wait for that crisis. So using the humanitarian humanitarian effort to solve that crisis, we are able to cream off some money, because I can tell you that 2 billion is too much for that particular program. And remember, as much as former President Moi has been vilified, but he built various national cereals and produce stores in various remote areas. So it's not that there's no storage space. They can actually have moved a lot of these foodstuffs, especially grains, to those stores as the weather was changing, in anticipation that this will happen, because it has always happened. So our lack of planning, then we create an emergency, And in a situation of an emergency, then those people who like creaming off from the public coffers get into play, and you get a budget like 2 billion shillings. Because remember, farmers recently were unable to sell their maize.
Yes.
Completely.
I can see something.
So how do you have some place surplus, another place deficit in the same country? Then now you want to spend 2 billion to distribute this food. It doesn't make sense. And I would like the Auditor General to get on this case immediately. That 2 billion. Is it really going into buying the food and distributing it, or was the food already bought? Now it's just a question of distribution. Because if it's a question of distribution only, then the 2 billion is not warranted. I think we should be ashamed of ourselves. And I can assure you that there are people with expertise within the civil service to actually do this. It's just that they are not given space to do so. They are not given space to do so, and we end up not utilizing their expertise. Otherwise, at this moment in time, we should not have this sort of situation. Just a few months ago, not even a few months ago,
yes,
weeks, there was a problem with farmers with their maize, which they were unable to purchase. Then now suddenly there's a food shortage somewhere, a crisis somewhere. I don't think it's right. And I think if we were serious people, we should look for the people who are responsible, who should have actually had the foresight to plan so that this thing doesn't happen, and call them to account. Why did they sleep on the job?
Why did they sleep on the job?
Yes.
Let's hear from Dr. Otieno Amollo.
I think that it's a dire situation, and there's urgent need to establish whether there have actually been deaths. I think the fundamental issue there is the assumption of the Constitution from Article 35 and the generality of the Constitution is that the government will keep the public posted on information that is important to them. So like now, we should not be speculating as to whether there have been deaths or not. We should not be speculating as to how dire the situation is. I think the government should proactively have told us what the actual situation is and what is being done about it. Because at the end of the day, it is of no use giving assurances to the public or a dying person that there's enough food to take care of them. They'll have been dead, or they'd have suffered so immensely that the planning should be such that when there's food, then there's mechanism for taking that food to those people who need it. And this is one situation where the national government and the county governments involved should work in very close collaboration. We should not have a situation where even elected leaders are speculating as to whether or not there is a crisis. That in itself is a crisis. It is also unfortunate that all this thing is coming at a time that all our scandals are surrounded around food security issues. Whether it's the maize scandal that we went through, whether it's the Gulana Kulalu Gulana that took so much food, whether it's the Aror and Kimwerer dams, all of them are situations where we put in so much money in bad schemes, and yet we have enough food and we have enough places where food like maize in the whole Kitale area, is naturally there, and in fact farmers are stopping to grow maize because the government is not buying. So it speaks to a crisis of policy around food security.
Crisis of policy around food security. Lastly, let's hear from Boni Khalwale and Jacome Dio on this.
I think I want to question the intention of images that are put in the papers. At the beginning, as Cheriot said correctly, this thing was started by bloggers on social media who attempted to use photographs that were not emanating from Kenya to drive a particular political narrative. In fact, originally...
So you want to tell us this particular image, if I might just speak it, this was in the Daily Nation yesterday. What are you trying to insinuate, Boni Khalwale?
If you allow me to conclude, if you follow my argument, you'll get it loud and clear.
I can already pick up. Pick up where you're going. Let me just put it.
My mind, don't you?
Okay. So which particular headline are you talking about? Just be very specific.
Yes.
Which headline are you talking about?
The narrative at the beginning was that people wanted to lace it with the political failure either by the governor or the local senator or the deputy president because he comes from that kind of community. Now, if you take now the Kenyan photographs, which are now in the Standard, there's a gentleman here called Joseph Kipsang. Joseph Kipsang, can
Today's
you go
Standard.
to page 9 and 8
Okay.
of the Standard?
Okay, I'll try and
So
lift
that
up
you beam
quickly.
in on those photographs for viewers to understand what I'm driving. The first photograph on page 8 of a young woman with her son, as a doctor who has practiced medicine most of my life in the rural areas, the photograph of this woman and that boy is a photograph of very healthy people. You wouldn't have a healthier child in the rural areas than this boy you're seeing here. That does not take away that probably he might have missed a meal the previous evening, but these are very healthy people. If you go to the next photograph, by again Joseph Kipsang, of the old mamas queuing for food. These are people who have a shortage of food in this photograph, but by state of their, if you look at their faces, these are people who have not been starving for weeks. Maybe they lack food for the previous day. Then if you go to the last photograph of the mama who is picking wild fruits. This is deliberate, using the word wild fruit. Here they call it sorich. But if you ask Eseli and I, mamas can comfortably go to Kakamega forest and pick a wild fruit there called bushero. And those bushero, they are very nice. Children take them. If you look at this woman, she's a very healthy woman. This narrative should be stopped. I think the best argument has been brought by Eseli that what is required is distribution of food to reach these people. The government should not be waiting for when the drought has started for them to move. Food should always be moved to those stores that were built by Moi.
What about this picture? This
was
was on yesterday's Daily Nation, and this is Akai Lorupe waiting for food rations at Nachoto village in Turkana County.
Yes.
What about the picture?
Look at that lady. That lady might be well over 70 years old.
Sitting on a parched land?
Yes. And they are using the terrain which is normal in their area. This kind of terrain is a normal terrain in Baringo and Turkana to blow this thing out of proportion. If we don't handle it very carefully, as Eseli said, we might actually give an opportunity to some operatives and scrapless people who want to blow it out of proportions so that something that is bound to cost us probably $500 million shillings ends up costing us 2-3 billion shillings that will not end.
2 billion has been put aside for.
Okay.
Exactly. So we got to assess it realistically and not create perceptions and narratives that have got nothing to do with the reality. What is wrong with these photographs? These are normal rural people.
This is on page
Yes, they're normal, healthy people.
page 4. Let me see of the Standard.
Yes,
Page 9.
Page
this is
9.
a very healthy woman. This one picking sorich, which in Kakamega forest is called Bosherero. It's very normal. So just take food there, distribute the food. Forget the.
All right.
And Governor Stanley Kiptis, the governor of Baringo, is a Tugen, like these people you're seeing here. He's not going just to sit in the office and allow his own people to die.
All right. So this is the pages that you're actually
Why
talking
are
about.
they not asking Stanley Kiptis to make a statement?
Okay.
I don't know, colleagues, if you noticed yesterday, I saw a government official, there was a clip, who was clarifying that the reported deaths were not because of hunger. They were deaths because of other issues.
What's the
So, yeah, we've got to be very careful.
All right. Let's hear from Jacob Medio.
I am stunned, Bonnie. I didn't even know you could diagnose people from a picture in the paper.
Because I'm qualified. I am qualified.
And these are the pictures he's talking about.
Bonnie has
I'm
just
qualified.
brought a very interesting angle to this. That people are talking about hunger in that unfortunate part of the world, just to get to William Ruto, you know, really, we have to get serious. This is airtime to Kenyans. You know, Bonnie, let me tell you, this is real. That government official, in fact, I was going to raise it, when he said only 9 people have died, and I watched him. I watched that press conference live. He said only 9 people have died. It is not 20. It is true people have died. The rest of them have died because of other diseases. It is lack of proper diet that most diseases occur. It is lack of food. And when we say that this is the way Turkanas look, I have met their people there, especially the ones that work now with county government. They are very fat. They have stolen from their people. What is happening? let us call a spade a spade. This is a crisis. Dibal, when the president says we declare famine a disaster, that is the voice of the state. I would have expected that when we woke up the other day, the whole military would have been there feeding the hungry. Would have NYS. Why do you have NYS youths doing security checks in the airport and they're not trained in security? Why can't they be down there feeding our Kenyans? Why can't we look for practical solutions without politics for once? Because yesterday, Dibal, 2 things I saw in your show. I saw that Honorable Pogisha telling us the dire situation on the ground and how he used to eat this thing. When you see somebody eating it, the next thing is death. This thing that Boni Halwale is calling food. It is poisonous. And why must I eat ugali and skuma or ugali and meat and my mother in Turkana eats poison? Somebody ought to be ashamed of themselves, especially at a time when we are saying billions are in people's pockets to build a dam in a thicket. These are real issues Kenyans are going through. And lastly, Dibal, this talk about the media always being wrong. Who do we want to get information from? We have just had this discussion here where we have not read a court ruling.
Thank you.
But we have seen it from the media. We are commenting on it. But here we are saying you begin by social media, then you say mainstream media.
Thank you.